This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hi there, it's Justin. Just before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to check something really important. Are you subscribed to my Think Faith newsletter? If not, you're missing out on articles, news, events, and updates. Subscribe today and I'll send you the first chapter of my surprising rebirth book. And one more thing, with the return of season 2 of the podcast, I would really value your monthly support to help me make this podcast looking at how the tide of faith is coming back in on the West. Become a silver supporter and you'll get early access to episodes plus exclusive bonus video content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and an invitation to The Inner Circle, a monthly catch-up with me on Zoom. For the newsletter or to support, go to the links with today's episode.
Western civilization is in crisis.
We know that the narratives and the stories that we are telling ourselves about who we are and about our future is damaging us.
When a civilization loses touch with the inspiration that made it, there's a certain point where you're faced with three choices. You either renew the original inspiration, or replace it with something else equally good, or decline. And all the great civilizations of history, they're in ruins.
We are the first generation to run a large-scale experiment to actually try to do Western things, cut loose from our spiritual roots.
Let's aspire to build or restore the nation-states on which our security depends. And let's ensure that they run as they used to on that Christian operating system without which we can have no moral compass.
In February 2025, over 4,000 people met in London's Excel Arena for 3 days, hearing from thinkers, politicians, theologians and activists. The conference wasn't billed as a religious event. There was no mention of God on the publicity. Yet when I attended, I found that a large proportion, probably the majority, of those present on the stage and in the seats were Christian, or at the very least, open to its value. So, what exactly is ARC?
The magic question right there. I think ARC seems to be the response to the World Economic Forum elite types on the left.
I think it's a movement to try and renew or restore what we understand as Western civilization.
Look, there's been an alliance, an unholy alliance. I'm not the first to say this. We've been talking about it, all of us, I imagine you have been, for years, between a kind of anti-woke atheist crowd and an anti-woke religious crowd. The kinds of people who would have hated one another in the 90s. And we appear to have put aside our differences.
Almost every talk has included Judeo-Christian belief or the morality behind it and foundation for 2 or 3 people told me, oh, they didn't expect it. It's a little bit weird.
ARC is actually articulating something very necessary in our Western world these days, and that is it relies on the values that it itself cannot reproduce. It has to draw from the Judeo-Christian background.
It is a mixed bag. It is a bunch of people with good intentions that don't necessarily agree on everything, which is something I like. But what I like about ARC is they are really asking the question, how can we fix the West?
ARC, the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship, describes itself as a movement to renew the foundations of Western civilization, but it does so from a specifically conservative-leaning and frequently Christian perspective. Established by psychologist Jordan Peterson and Baroness Philippa Stroud, an evangelical Christian, the conference first took place in London in 2023. Now in 2025, with more than double the number in attendance and taking place soon after the inauguration of Donald Trump, the event was framed by a very different political background.
My friends, there really is great reason for our hope. Here in America, as you are all seeing, we're in the midst of a great change. In our national election a few months ago, our people delivered truly a mandate to make our country great again.
I have a lot of sympathy with what drove people to vote for Trump, but I'm telling you, as someone who's on the front row to what's happening, do not hitch your wagon to that star. Thank you. You're supposed to boo.
I haven't been comfortable with all the aspects here of Christian nationalism. Nationalism alone will lead to might is right. The strongest nations will decide. And that's actually a disturbing aspect too. We've been in a cocoon these few days.
Among the attendees and speakers were many who have gone on a journey to discover the cultural value and utility of Christianity. But is it leading to faith?
Did you have a new atheist phase where you were dismissive and antagonistic?
I would say from 2010 to 2015 or 16 pretty strongly, which I have publicly repented of that behavior.
I mean, if I were given control of the education system now, it would look very different and probably very Christian, even though I'm not one myself, which I realize is ironic. But I view myself as living in a paradigm where I've had something taken away from me.
The Christian faith will not do anything for civilization if it's viewed as useful. It will do nothing for civilization if we turn it into a psychological version of whatever. It will only be true and effective if it's understood to be true.
Since beginning my own journey charting the surprising rebirth of belief in God, I've been aware that many of the most significant voices influencing culture back towards the value of faith have been gathering under the banner of ARC. I've also been charting, as you'll hear on the first two episodes of this new season of the podcast, the political dimension of this new movement. ARC is in many ways a manifestation of the overlap of the political and religious voices in this new conversation on God emerging in the West. Naturally, I wanted to be at the 2025 conference in order to listen and learn, and went equipped with a cameraman and my microphone to interview attendees and speakers. Today, I'm bringing you some highlights from my conversations, the main stage talks and panel discussions, along with my own reflections, as I pose the question, should we all get on board the ARC? I'm Justin Brierley, and in this podcast series, I'm bringing you the inside account of why a meaning crisis in the modern world and the search for a better story about life are leading many 21st century people to reconsider Christian faith. Welcome back to Season 2 of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Episode 6, All Aboard the Ark? Why Conservatives Want to Save Christendom.
Acura's all-new ADX, a compact SUV that isn't just built for one thing, it's precision-crafted for everything. To escape the grind with available all-wheel drive. To go with your flow with available Google built-in.
Hey Google, turn it up.
Okay, turning up the volume. And crafted to be heard with an available Bang & Olufsen premium sound system. The all-new Acura ADX, crafted to match your energy. Acura, precision-crafted performance.
Take your vibes and go, 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 go.
Google is a trademark of Google LLC.
From 96 countries, from the East, the West, the North and the South, from hundreds of professions and across every sector and walk of life, you have come.
This is Philippa Stroud opening the ARC conference.
Because those of us who love our nations and who love the principles and values on which it is founded know that there is something that is wrong. We know that the narratives and the stories that we are telling ourselves about who we are and about our future is damaging us. We are living through a civilizational moment. We are living through a social revolution, a complete experiment. We're living through an energy revolution and a technological revolution. And like in the days of old, we're coming together to decide what is to be done. It was Frodo who said to Gandalf, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the times that we are given."
With Tolkien's inspiring words kicking things off, Jordan Peterson took to the stage to a standing ovation.
The foundational texts of Western civilization, the biblical texts in particular, are an extended study in the intricacies of sacrifice, predicated on the emergent discovery or realization that the sacrifice most pleasing to God, that sets the world right, that creates the order that is good or very good, is the sacrifice that tends towards the ultimate. And the Christian drama portrays the sacrificial process in its arguably ultimate form.
As ever, Peterson delivered an intense, psychologically framed, and some might argue slightly verbose opening message from the stage, mixing the political aspirations of the conference with a call to sacrifice inspired by the Bible.
And it's not just sacrifice. It's voluntary self-sacrifice towards the highest possible end. That's the foundation of civilization. The postmodernists be damned.
Peterson knows how to inspire people. Evidently, many of those present were there because of him. I happened to be sitting next to Johannes, a good example of a young man who's decided to proactively take charge of his life. He told me about Exodus 90, a course he had embarked upon aimed at getting rid of porn addiction and cultivating spiritual maturity.
The aim of it is to get rid of your wisest connect with other men and grow closer to God. I did it. I do it now the fourth time, and it really helped me to improve my prayer life and my relationship to my wife and my children, and also to grow closer to God. Basically, it's.
Where did it come from originally?
It came from a U.S. priest seminary, and they had some issues with internet pornography and other vices, and so they came up with this spiritual dopamine detox program, basically. And I think 200 men are supposed to have done it so far, and it has a huge impact for many men's lives.
And it involves prayer, but also cold showers?
These ascetic disciplines are quite rigorous. As you said, you have to do cold showers, but also you shouldn't eat sweets and meals in between and so on. But the focus should be on prayer, of course. And another very important aspect is fraternity. So you're doing it in a group of people or men of eight men. And you're growing closer to those men as well. So it's formed a huge friendships and very precious friendships for me so far.
But personal life change took a backseat for most of the conference to public politics. And from the outset, a number of voices from the right were profiled. Kemi Badenoch, the new leader of the UK Conservative Party, spoke.
We doubt our ability to build like our predecessors did. We doubt liberal values of tolerance or free trade, demanding a post-liberal world. It's not liberal values that are the problem. It's weakness.
Mike Johnson, Speaker of the US House of Representatives, unable to break away from drama in the Oval Office, joined by a live link to tell delegates that Trump's government heralded a new dawn.
My friends, there really is great reason for our hope. Here in America, as you were all seeing, we're in the midst of a great change. In our national election a few months ago, our people delivered truly a mandate to make our country great again and to restore common sense in our public policy. Here and elsewhere, the radical big government progressives pushed that pendulum too far and too aggressively to the left, and the people rose up and said, enough.
Nigel Farage, leader of Reform, a party that's now the right-wing alternative to the Conservative Party in the UK, set out his stall, but also had a candid moment when interviewed on stage by Peterson about whether he stands for putting monogamous heterosexual marriage back at the centre of society.
Mike, what do you think about that?
Well, I may not necessarily be the best advocate for monogamous heterosexuality or stable marriage.
Yep.
Having been divorced twice.
I'm told that speakers from other left-leaning political parties were invited, but chose not to attend. Regardless, the profiling of Conservative politicians at the outset of the conference set the tone for the day and immediately raised the spectre of how politics and faith mix at ARC. As well as interviewing attendees on the floor of the conference, I had the use of a private podcast booth for some more intimate conversations with speakers and delegates. And I began by sitting down with influential Christian YouTubers Ruslan and John McCrae, aka Whaddo Meme.
What is ARC? Do you guys have a working definition of what this strange melding of Christians and conservative-leaning thinkers and influencers actually is? I'll start with you, Ruslan.
It's the magic question right there. I think ARC seems to be the response to the World Economic Forum elite types on the left. This seems like a calculated, intentional investment to respond and provide a better alternative to where the world should go.
Yeah, and I'd say similarly, I think the way I understand it is they're trying to grab a lot of thought leaders from around the world, and kind of like the ARC. I'm sure the ARC, it's is an acronym, but also I think what they have, they use it symbolically as well too, because it's
like a biblical ARC.
That's right, like the biblical ARC. Yeah.
Alongside the political voices profiled on stage were plenty of Christian voices too. An early panel discussion included Christian thinker Os Guinness, Archbishop Angelos of the Coptic Church, and Catholic philosopher Johannes Hartl, looking at what faith has offered and can offer to this civilizational moment.
For me, the conversion of the barbarians, or the gentling of the European people, we're barbarians underneath. And then high view of human dignity. And then a culture of giving and caring coming from things like the Good Samaritan and so on. And then, of course, the unity of the West with the incredible diversity. The one point of unity was not authoritarian, it was the faith. And then you've got the Catholic contribution, the revival of learning, the cathedral schools, the universities. And then I think you've got the Protestant contribution, a politics of covenantal freedom. So many of these great foundational truths, I think we've got to go back to understand them and what they've meant to the rise of the West.
One character in Scripture who really inspires me is Nehemiah. Because he goes, he sees the walls broken down, he sees work that needs to be done, and he rallies people. And each one builds in front of his own place. Now, each one here builds where he or she is. But then he recognizes there's a threat, and he says, the distance is great between us. And so when you hear the trumpet, rally there to us, and the Lord our God will protect us. And I think this is very much a trumpet moment.
So Western civilization, after the downfall of the Roman Empire, was not just constructed on doers and thinkers, but it was actually monks who started prayer houses and monasteries who prayed through that spiritual atmosphere.
I sat down with Johannes Hartl, who has established a prayer network in Germany, to talk about his contribution from the stage.
I was sort of delighted that you used that opportunity you had in the panel discussion to talk about prayer. Do you want to just explain what you said?
Yeah, I said, in this room are many people who are doers and we are intellectuals, so we are thinkers. But there are some things you cannot do. You cannot manipulate, you cannot achieve by your own willpower, your own strength. And then there are some things you cannot understand by intellectual reasoning alone. There's mystery. There is the one thing that cannot be grasped by intelligence alone. And there are things that are beyond our reach. And this is what opens us up for the realm of the spiritual, actually. So I believe prayer makes us humble. In the face of that, we cannot control, which is a lot, and what we cannot comprehend by intellect alone. And I think if we fall prey to the temptation to believe that everything is within our reach, our grasp, we necessarily become ideologues.
And the thing that stayed with me of what you said was the fact that when, if you like, the fall of the Roman Empire occurred and the rebuilding began, it was actually houses of prayer, the monasteries, the monks who were kind of integral to that, even though the modern person may say, why didn't they do something rather than just praying? But for you, prayer as a Christian obviously is part of what it is to build a culture.
See, I grew up in a very village where a Benedictine monastery was founded in 766 AD, and it's still going. There's still monks praying every day. So we in the House of Prayer, we've been praying for 13 years, which is nothing. Those guys have been praying for 1,200 years.
Yeah.
So in those dark ages, it was really monks who were willing to sacrifice their own life. So Jordan Peterson spoke about sacrifice, but something like, get your acts together, aim for the higher good, which is all okay. But also Europe was founded on martyrs willing to give their life away for Jesus. So there is something in the fruitfulness, a culture. Colere is the English, the Latin word below culture, which means to tend a garden, so to speak. Culture is something that exists only if something dies, right? It's the metaphor Jesus uses. It's a plant, it's a seed willing to fall on the ground and to die. So there is something about us laying down our own ambitions. See, otherwise the kingdom of God will be manipulated by our own willpower to serve our ideological ends.
And hence why you existed this tension, I almost feel, here at somewhere like ARC.
Oh, yeah.
You find a common cause at one level with the ideals, but you're not quite sure about the execution in every case of how we build this kingdom, because there are earthly kingdoms that sometimes get mixed up with religion. There's a lot of Christians here. You're not, by far, not the only Christian that has been on the stage. But where do those concerns lie, I suppose, in terms of how we go about this civilizational project that we've been hearing about?
Well, we can't shy away from it, right? We can't detach ourselves and go up on the mountains and only pray. So there is only mixed motives in this world. There is only mixed organizations. Yeah, there is no such thing as pure heaven down here. What I like very much, there's a story about Bernard of Clairvaux, who once preached. It was around 1200 AD, and he would experience mass conversions, huge success. Thousands would come to his sermons, and once he was speaking, he heard a voice, and the voice said, "Bernard, preach a little bit more, and they will crown you Caesar. They will crown you emperor." Then he heard a second voice. The voice said, "Bernard, stop preaching. It's only out of pride. It would be more humble to stop preaching." And he turned around and said, "Devil, I didn't start for you, and I will not stop for you," which is very interesting, right? So the solution is not to withdraw from everything, even if we are, of course, in the danger of falling prey to whatever seduction, but to refocus the best we can, right? So for me as a Christian, I'm not here because I endorse every speech on the stage, but I think here are many people with good intentions. So I was able to bring in my thing, which even contained an element of criticism on Jordan Peterson. I was allowed to do that, so why shouldn't I?
I was very glad of voices like Johannes that were willing to ask awkward questions from the stage. However, most of the panellists tended to furiously agree with one another, and I would have also appreciated a little more diversity of thought on stage to get the crowd thinking. The XL Centre itself is a cavernous venue with stalls set out in the exhibition area for a variety of campaigning and media organisations. Networking in between sessions over refreshments and meals was encouraged via an app that connected you with other delegates. And I found myself just constantly bumping into people I knew or wanted to get to know. As pastor to the intellectual dark web, Paul Vanderklay, put it to me, finding interesting people to interview was like shooting fish in a barrel. One of the people I accosted on the floor of the exhibition was Peter Lynas, former barrister and now UK director of the Evangelical Alliance. I asked him what he made of the mix of people and worldviews present at ARC.
I think it seems to be pulling together like-minded people. Yeah. Without totally defining the like-mindedness of that. Yeah. So relational is definitely at the core of it. And there's a lot of people of faith, but a lot of Jewish people, Catholic people, Orthodox people, Christian people, and lots of people with no expressed faith, but all saying there's something around family, there's something around human-centered, there's something around like pro-human is a lot of language, human flourishing and hope-filled. Yeah. Now, for me, that is centered on faith, and for others, they've said it's centered on either their faith, which might be different, or something beyond. So I think that's where it gets interesting. But actually, it's a really open space for dialogue. So even if it's people of different faiths or no faith, there's a space to say, but faith is a driving motivation that isn't always there in other conversations. So I'm really happy that it's at least on the table and we can talk about it. Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of, Jordan Peterson himself and the journey he's been on? Well, you've got to be that cautious piece about expressly commenting on one person's journey, but he's been pretty public about wrestling with it. Yeah. How he explores it. I think his understanding of God and the biblical text is really interesting. His constant engagement to biblical metaphors. Yeah. My own sense it is his understanding of kind of Jesus and grace and the filling of the Holy Spirit is a little different than mine, and maybe there's a bit more space for that. But I love the way he takes the text as almost like his founding place, the biblical text, and jumps off from there. I think, personally, he's probably on a bit of a journey still to understanding all of that. And yet there are places where his richness and depth is incredible. Yeah. And then there are places he goes off slightly on a tangent where I'm like, that's a bit weird. I wouldn't go there. But that's part, I think, of the interest for this conversation with lots of people is the way he explores it and the way he holds that and allows other people to explore faith, which I think is exciting. And do you find that can open a door that wouldn't necessarily be there for some people if he had just sort of jumped straight into a more orthodox Christian? Yeah, I was chatting to somebody who did say their own son had asked for walked away from faith, but asked for a copy of the Bible because they were listening to Jordan Peterson. Yeah. And there's some basically said if Peterson was a standard Christian and made an obvious conversion, he probably wouldn't listen and be interested. But the fact that there was this open space, he asked the dad to send him a Bible, and that opened the space for them to converse father to son around this. So I think that's really interesting, that the slower journey of conversion is challenging our desire for if there's a moment you're a Christian or you're not, and it's allowing other people to journey around his exploration and maybe explore a little bit with him. So as a wise man once said, there is a surprising rebirth in the belief in God, and it does seem to be happening for people.
Did you know that leaving a rating and a review on your podcast app helps others to discover this show? Thanks to Bickwiser, who described it as something rare and precious, providing spiritually crafted brain food and a spiritual uplift. Sharing an episode with others on social media also makes a huge difference. But the way you can make the biggest difference to this show is by supporting my work, either via Patreon from anywhere in the world or through US tax-deductible giving from the USA. Either option gets you the same perks. Become a silver supporter and you'll get early access to episodes plus exclusive bonus video content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me on Zoom. And I get so much out of those catch-ups with supporters myself. I really love them. So to support, just go to the links with today's episode info.
Hi, here's your report.
Thanks, Jane. I wish I could hire a whole team of yous.
Try posting a job on LinkedIn. It's the world's largest professional network. Unlike resumes, LinkedIn gives a real-time view into a candidate's skills, experiences, and more.
Let's do it. You're irreplaceable, Jane, but another you would be great.
Find your perfect match with LinkedIn. Post your free job at linkedin.com/achieve. That's linkedin.com/achieve. Terms and conditions apply.
Faraday presenta Ojos con Alergia y Picazón contra el jardinero. Y el ganador es Faraday Extra Fuerte. Para aliviar la picazón de los ojos por alergia, actúa más rápido y supera a Claritin y Flonase aún a las 24 horas. Faraday, adelante.
On stage, that mix of secular and religious voices, all advocating a common theme of this being the time for renewal, was delivered time and again by conservative secular voices, such as Douglas Murray.
We've wasted so much time in recent years.
We've wasted so much time. People have made us move at such a retarded speed. We've had years of talking about the most basic things that our species knew. Men and women, what are they? Come on. Who had time for this?
New convert Ayaan Hirsi argued for the importance of the nation-state built on Judeo-Christian foundations.
Let's aspire to build or restore the nation-states on which our security depends. And let's ensure that they run as they used to on that Christian operating system without which we can have no moral compass.
Comedian and self-described lapsed atheist Konstantin Kissin borrowed a phrase that I'm rather partial to.
So, what has happened since we were last here? Well, on the positives, let's call it what it is. The tide is turning.
But for the trigonometry host, the turning tide is a political one.
Our American friends are leading the way. DEI, a system of anti-meritocratic discrimination, is being dismantled, not just in the American government, but much more importantly for us here, in the global corporate world as well. Once again, we can dream that our children will be judged on the content of the character, and not the color of the square they post on Instagram.
This positive, even belligerently confident tone of conservatives emboldened by Trump's rise to power was present at various points in the conference. I sat down with former Conservative MP Miriam, now a presenter for the right-leaning news channel GB News, and asked her how her Christian faith sat alongside her political career.
If you really throw yourself into the job of politics and you are trying to do the right thing, stand up for the truth, then you kind of have to, well, I kind of have to rely on God for the security, the protection even, because it is a very, very vulnerable place. And I know a lot of people don't say certain things, won't speak on certain issues because of fear. And I totally understand that. But I think if you have faith, if you believe that, seek first the kingdom of God and everything else will be added, that does give you the courage to step out.
As much as I'm encouraged and quite enthusiastic about that, I also hear a lot of people who are rather concerned because they look at an ARC conference and they look at essentially a lot of conservative leaning thinkers want to kind of embrace civilizational kind of Christian values again. And they say, is that just co-opting the faith for another political agenda?
Yes, we shouldn't allow people, we should certainly challenge people when they co-opt Christianity for political means. I think that's probably what taking the Lord's name in vain probably means. But on the other hand, if people start to examine Christianity, the foundations of the faith, and see that it is the source of our flourishing, the next step, of course, is to ask, is it true? So I think it's a very, very helpful, useful and encouraging development that people are examining Christianity as a cultural force, because of course the next step is then to say, well, if it's true, and if it's true, what are the implications for me and my life and my family and my community? And so I personally find that exciting. Yes, we should defend against people who are perhaps using a religion for political ends, but in terms of an awakening, understanding and a rediscovery, it's great.
There is a kind of real kind of groundswell of people kind of reacting against sort of the extremes of the progressive left. It seems to be swinging back in various parts of the world towards a more conservative right-wing agenda. And is there a danger of kind of, when you see a lot of Christians just very vocally getting behind Donald Trump, for instance, is that a problem or not?
Well, I think we should be very careful as Christians that absolutely we should exercise our political freedom. We should be free to support whoever we want and explain why. But I think we should be very clear there's a difference between secular leadership and God's kingdom. Right. And, I think Donald Trump is doing a lot of great things. I really, really like J.D. Vance. I think it's absolutely right for some of the disruption that's taking place. Look at the money that's been spent through USAID on some of the most absurd and sometimes obscene things that are, of course, not in anybody's interest. I think it's good that those things are being broken up. But I also don't think for one moment that the Trump government won't have the same flaws, the same temptations, the same weaknesses as any other secular authority, because it is a secular authority. So I think we should be cautious. We shouldn't be uncritical, but at the same time, I think we should welcome some of the things that the government is doing. But I think I'm not an expert on the American political situation at all, but it does seem to me that they're much more open about talking about God. I mean, even Donald Trump talks about God and how he believes God saved him. Whether he's doing that because he's appealing to an audience, I don't know. But you just can't imagine that in this country.
Despite the overall positive attitude of speakers like Miriam towards Trump's new term, not everyone was as enthusiastic. One of the key talking points of the conference came when New York Times columnist David Brooks made a dramatic critique of the Trump administration from the stage.
The third thing the educated elite has done, and this may not please you, is we produced Donald Trump. Some people think Donald Trump is a populist. Donald Trump and Elon Musk went to the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school, and became billionaires. J.D. Vance went to Yale. Pete Hegseth went to Princeton and Yale. Stephen Miller went to Duke. Fox News types like Laura Ingraham went to Dartmouth. And they represent the educated elite. And the key factor of the educated elite is that they're not pro-conservative, they're anti-left. They don't have a positive vision, a conservative vision for society. They just want to destroy the institutions that the left now dominates. And this means, in the first place, they're astoundingly incompetent. I have a lot of sympathy with what drove people to vote for Trump, but I'm telling you, as someone who's on the front row to what's happening, do not hitch your wagon to that star. Thank you. You're supposed to boo. Pete Hegseth gave away our bargaining chips with Putin before we even had negotiations.
The booing was interesting. You may not have caught it, but someone also shouted traitor. I was sitting just a few feet from that heckler. But there was applause present in the hall too. In fact, many people I spoke to afterwards saw Brooks's critique from the stage as a breath of fresh air and an indication that ARC was at least willing to profile voices that disagreed with others in the room. Brooks has his own surprising rebirth story. Beginning with Jewish religious roots, he came to faith in Christ himself about 10 years ago. During his conversion, David Brooks was highly influenced by and became friends with the New York pastor Tim Keller, and he seems to have inherited the Manhattan preacher's style of winsome cultural engagement, in contrast to the culture-warring posture of some conservatives. Indeed, his newly Christian vision of reality seems to fire both his own concerns about Trump and his hopes for what real civilizational renewal looks like.
I believe that we are inheritors of a great spiritual legacy, what Michael Oakeshott called the Great Conversation. We have the voice of Genesis, that we're all made in God's image. That's the foundation of democracy. We have the voice of Exodus, that we wander through the wilderness and eventually get to the promised land. We have the voice of Jesus, even if you're not Christian, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit. That's a source of great strength. In my country, we have the voice of Alexander Hamilton. Poor boys and girls should rise and succeed. We have the voice of Edmund Burke, that we should be modest about what we can know because culture is really complicated and we should operate on society the way we would operate on our Father, gradually and carefully. We have the voice of John Stuart Mill. We value diversity and pluralism because it leads to what he called adventures in living. When you have a spiritual, moral, and relational crisis, the job is to shift the culture. And we are moving, I think, from a hyper-individualistic culture the last 60 years toward a communal culture. I didn't like the social justice movement, but it was an attempt to find community. I'm not particularly a big fan of MAGA, but it's an attempt to find community. Culture change is about a shifting of the heart. It's about providing new answers to the question, how should I live my life? It's about soulcraft. And it isn't done the way you do political change. Culture change works differently. It's done, as Walter Bagehot put it, if you want to win people over, enjoy the things that conservatives enjoy. Culture changes when a creative minority find a beautiful way to live. Culture changes when a small group of people find a better way to live and the rest of us copy. That's the story of the early church.
David Brooks. Of all the main stage talks, it was one of the most defining moments of the conference and worth watching in full. Indeed, Trump was in global headlines even while the conference was underway, as he began peace talks with Russia that seemed at the time to exclude Ukraine and give all the ground to Putin in Moscow. Indeed, on social media, he'd even described Zelensky as a dictator. Over a cup of coffee, in the break, Jeff Fountain, a Christian thinker who directs the Schumann Center for European Studies, told me that while he appreciates the aims of ARC, he also has his concerns.
At the same time, I haven't been comfortable with all the aspects here of Christian nationalism, the strong Anglo-American feeling here and nationalism, because I come from the continental Europe, and I'm a great believer in the need for the nations to move beyond independence to interdependence, to finding out how do we work together. Nationalism alone will lead to might is right. The strongest nations will decide. And that's actually a disturbing aspect too. We've been in a cocoon these few days when huge shifts are happening with, I would see it, a continuation, well, a repeat really, of the appeasement that took place in Munich with Chamberlain. We're seeing something similar happening right now. And the nation that stood up for these values is being abandoned, Ukraine. And the word Ukraine hasn't even been mentioned here. Many nations have been mentioned, but we are ignoring the huge shift that's happening right now, and that's my concern. Yes, we must recover these values, but responsible citizenship actually means being responsible for carrying responsibility for what's happening before our very eyes. Will we recognize what's happening right now, this moment of civilization?
Yeah, that's a really helpful perspective. And like you, what's going on with Ukraine right now, Trump and Putin meeting and excluding Ukraine essentially from those talks, it has barely been mentioned. One person who got a few boos, but I was very glad of the presence of, was David Brooks, the New York Times columnist yesterday, and I think you shared that feeling. What did you take away from his particular comments?
Yes, he was he had just come in cold, actually. He didn't have time to calibrate to what was going on here, which was a good thing.
Yes.
Because he just came out and declared, with a stroke of the pen, Trump has been destroying so many lives. And he was prepared to speak out clearly. And that was necessary because so far the sentiment had been very much on the other side. I was grateful for his input.
The question that remained firmly at the centre of all of this is the question we've tackled a few times now on this podcast. Is all this talk of the value of faith and the benefits of Christian civilization just about restoring some cultural version of Christendom, but without Christ at the centre? It's a question that's exercised others who are part of this surprising rebirth movement. Paul Kingsnorth wasn't present, but wrote about his concerns, saying of the ARC conference, what is being promoted here is not Christianity or even Christian civilization. It is the needs and desires of liberal Western modernity, the creed of Faustian man. The Christian faith, where it appears, is entirely secondary to the project of renewing Western politics and culture. So, is Kingsnorth's summary accurate? In part, but not entirely, in my view. Some participants certainly lived up to that description, but others less so. In fact, throughout the conference, I felt there was a battle going on for the soul of ARC. Because in fairness, the solutions being offered from the stage weren't simply a return to conservative politics, especially those coming from a distinctly faith perspective. After his talk, David Brooks chaired a panel of thinkers: historian Neil Ferguson, former Australian Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson, Christian apologist Amy Orr-Ewing, and writer Rod Dreher, who happens to be a friend of Kingsnorth. As it happened, all four panellists and the moderator were Christians, the most recent convert being Neil Ferguson, husband to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was baptised alongside her in September last year, having come to faith himself after seeing the dramatic impact his wife's conversion had had on her life. Naturally, their conversation turned to the spiritual dimensions of this civilizational moment. And in doing so, Rod Dreher invoked the name of another former guest of the surprising rebirth of belief in God.
One of the real prophets of our time is a psychiatrist named Ian McGilchrist. I've seen him around here today. And Dr. McGilchrist has a theory of culture based on brain hemispheres. He said that in the left hemisphere is the analytic side, the right hemisphere is, of course, the perceptive side. The problem with the West, he says, is that at the beginning of the modern age, we leaned very heavily into the left hemisphere because it gave us power. Someone yesterday quoted Yuval Noah Harari saying, we exchanged meaning for power at the beginning of the modern period. And that has made us all rich and technologically advanced and all the good things. But Dr. McGilchrist says it has left us utterly bereft spiritually, creatively, and so forth. And we're not going to see recovery until and unless we achieve balance.
Amy Orr Ewing reiterated the need to believe that God is more than just a useful concept.
God within the Bible is not an idea. God is in actuality a person. And so to be created in the image of God is to have extraordinary dignity and value. And that, to a generation that have been raised being told your identity is, dependent on yourself. You have to generate it yourself, and your identity is defined by intersectional injustice, and then you're propelled by grievance into this world. What a contrast to view yourself and other human beings as sacred image bearers of a living God who we can have connection with. And I think the second most powerful idea is the idea of redemption, the possibility of grace and a second chance, the possibility of forgiveness.
John Anderson was optimistic that with the right spiritual fuel in the engine, Western culture can get back on track.
Let's not give up. The machine is still operable. The institutions of freedom that our grandparents gave us, with the right fuel, with the right elites, with the right people motivated by the right, if you like, spirituality, for want of a better word, we can recapture freedom. It's not too late. So you young people, be encouraged, but be challenged as well.
Former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson has been instrumental in organising ARC in Australia. In fact, there was a fairly large delegation of Australians present for the London conference, one of them being Carl Fays, director of the production company Olive Tree Media. I caught up with him over breakfast.
Well done for putting in the hours to get here. I mean, you and 500 other
About 300. About 300 Australians and New Zealanders, although we're not mentioned in New Zealand. It's about 300. But the intriguing thing about the Australian group is that there's quite significant political leaders here.
Yeah.
Two ex-prime ministers, an ex-treasurer of Australia, key people.
Yeah.
Key people.
It's intriguing because ARC, nowhere on the ARC literature will you find the word Christian or even God. And yet it's packed out with Christians. Lots of Christians are on the speaker list. So it's an interesting melange of different things all under one roof. You're obviously a Christian yourself, Carl. So what is the Christian dimension of ARC as far as you can see?
I mean, let me just say about the Christian thing. There was a well-known Australian politician called Mark Latham, who's anyway, I won't go into Mark Latham, bit of a colourful character out of Australia. And he came to the first ARC, and a friend of mine was chatting to him, and he's like, I've been conned. I've been conned. This is a Christian event. And he was quite miffed that he'd been conned to turn up to a Christian event. Look, I think my take comes out of yesterday, which is this notion of, if you're going to reach back to what made the West is what it is. We're great countries that have done incredibly well, and with freedom and dignity of the individual and all of that. What are the values you're grasping after? Well, the values you're grasping after are Christian values. That's the issue. And I found Jordan Peterson's talk yesterday morning remarkable for two reasons. One was, seriously, not a note, 20 minutes, dense, and not just, a couple of great stories, like dense concepts. But there was the notion of, if we're going to push back to back away from a hedonistic, narcissistic Western culture, what do you respond with? Well, you respond with sacrifice. And his concept that to be married, there's a sense of sacrifice. To be in a family, there's a sense of sacrifice. To be part of a community, in the sense that you've got to give up something that you might want for the good of others, which is a totally Christian concept. And I think that's sort of foundational value of ARC.
Great to catch up with you, and have a good trip back.
Thank you.
From Australians to an Englishman who lives in the USA, Os Guinness is arguably one of the elder statesmen of Christian apologetics and cultural engagement. And in a conference where the political utility of faith was frequently being championed or spoken of in highly psychological terms, I was very glad of his direct challenge from the stage.
Is the God of Sinai, the God of the burning bush, the God of the burning mountain, and our Lord with the call of Galilee, are these things true or not? The Christian faith will not do anything for civilization if it's viewed as useful. It will do nothing for civilization if we turn it into a psychological version of whatever. It will only be true and effective if it's understood to be true. And you have enough people who are citizens who have an ultimate loyalty to what they see as ultimate reality.
Revolutionize your cooking with the Tefal infrared air fryer. Watch as your food crisps up through a large lighted window and delight in faster, crispier, and juicier results with no preheating thanks to Tefal's advanced infrared technology. Discover the future of cooking and bring innovation into your kitchen by visiting Tefal.com.
Empower. Claire is practicing her breathing for her upcoming yoga retreat in Bali. Has she ever done yoga before? No. But Claire worked with Empower on her savings and investment strategy. She got good at money, so she can be a little bad. Empower. Invest well, live a little. Join our 19 million customers today at Empower.com.
Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Investing involves risks. You may lose money. Advisory services are provided for a fee by Empower Advisor Group, LLC, EAG, a registered investment advisor with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Om Namaste.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Commercial Insurance. Business owners, meet Progressive Insurance. They make it easy to get discounts on commercial auto insurance and find coverages to grow with your business. Quote in as little as 6 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliated and third-party insurers. Discounts and coverage selections not available in all states or situations.
The ARC conference was a hugely interesting event, one where I often felt conflicted, but also encouraged at various points. Of course, this brief recap of the conference is highly subjective. I primarily engaged in the parts of ARC that most appealed to me. Religion and politics weren't the only topics being discussed. Whole streams were dedicated to technology, energy policies, economics, art and culture. There was also significantly a breakfast prayer gathering every morning for those who wanted to attend. Now, while important questions remain around its fusion of right-wing politics and Christian faith, the main reason I wanted to be at ARC was because many of the people present, whether on the stage or milling around the exhibition area, are witnessing the surprising rebirth of belief in God in their communities or even their own lives. Where else can you find such a fascinating mix of Christians and non-Christians who are searching for a better story? Whatever you think of the politics, as Glenn Scrivener explained in his own summary of ARC for Speak Life, the conference represents, if nothing else, an extraordinary mission field, as his conversations with non-Christian delegates proved.
I was there for 3 days. I went with 3 evangelistic books of mine to give away to people, and I got rid of those before lunch on day 1, having one conversation after another. So whenever I talk to somebody, I would just say, what's it like being surrounded by so many Christians? Because there are just Christians everywhere. The great majority of those on stage are Christian, whether they declare that or not. And I would say the great majority of those who are in attendance are Christians of one stripe or another. And so if it turned out that somebody wasn't, I was like, what's it like being surrounded by all these Christians? And then I would explain, I am one, by the way, just before you say anything too horrible about Christian. And we would get into deep, rich conversations about, you know what, I started reading Job. You know, that's what one guy, he wasn't even a Christian, and yet on his business card, he was a writer, on his business card, he had proverbs written, like he had a proverb. like with the Bible reference underneath it, as he gave it to me. And he's been like really deeply impacted by Jordan Peterson and wanting to read the scriptures more. And so we get into this conversation, and by the end of it, I give away one book. And like the very next person I talk to, another very deep conversation about Jesus. The next person, a very deep conversation about Jesus. I was done with all these, but I've now got to go and post. I've got to go and post another couple of books to people. Afterwards, I just didn't bring enough evangelistic literature with me, which means next arc, I wonder if, I don't know if I'll pay for a ticket, but I might pay for a stand and go into the exhibition hall. And I think what I'll have is just a massive sign, and it'll just say, stop talking about biblical values and read the darn thing. And I'll just hand out Bibles to people. I think that might be incredibly fruitful. And like, how does that strike you, if you're a Christian, how does that strike you that there is an incredibly fruitful mission field on the right of things?
Maybe that's what ARC is, an evangelistic mission field for those on the right. Orthodox priest Father Andrew Damick was also one of those in attendance, and he told me that while what was happening on stage was its own thing, what was happening off stage was far more interesting to him. He said, I was approached by dozens of people who within a sentence or two of our exchange wanted to talk about Christ and the spiritual world with little or no prompting from me. My cassock, I'm sure, served as an invitation, but it struck me as remarkable that there was such a readiness of many people to speak with a total stranger about what is deepest and most compelling. Catholic Bishop Robert Barron, whose influential social media ministry has been part of the surprising rebirth phenomenon, was certainly in full preaching flow when he spoke to those present in the auditorium seeking God.
Unleash the human spirit, and you do it in relation to God. Don't believe the modern lie that somehow belief in God chains the spirit. The opposite is true. It's belief in God. It's belief in God that unleashes the Spirit. Last image for you. 1979, John Paul II goes to Warsaw. It was the height of the struggle. You know, they're worried about Soviet invasion and all of that. And John Paul in the great public square in front of 1 million people began simply talking about human rights and about human dignity and about grace and about redemption. And they say the people began to chant, "We want God, we want God, we want God." For 15 minutes, 1 million people chanting it. That's how the revolution that undermined the whole Soviet empire, that's how it began. So today, as I do a lot of work in evangelization, and yes, we know the statistics in the West about the decline of religion, and it's all true. I mean, we have to pay attention to all that. But what I see very much in my own work, especially in young people in the West, is that same cry. We want God, we want God, we want God. Because they're sensing that's the key, not only to their personal flourishing, but to the flourishing of our society. God bless you all. Thanks for listening today.
I caught up with Bishop Barron in my podcast booth to hear more about his own experience of meeting the needs of surprising rebirth seekers.
Bishop Robert Barron, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Delighted to talk to you.
We're here at the ARC conference. What is ARC as far as you can see, and what brings you as a speaker?
I've been here now, this is my second year. I was here for the first one, a little over a year ago. My sense of ARC is it's trying to recover the best of Western civilization and revive it according to its own best values. That's how I read it. Jordan Peterson and I have had a friendship for a while, and I kind of know where his mind is at in regard to these more civilizational issues. So I was happy to contribute to it. Last year I was here for the inaugural one, and this one's bigger. I think they have twice as many or 3 times as many people. So it's impressive. It's an impressive gathering of people too. Just moving around the kind of expo room there, I met the whole world. So I think it's really a healthy thing.
Yeah, a lot of Christians all under one roof, but alongside an interesting mix of a lot of secular folk, sort of conservative thinkers, influencers, and so on. I mean, do you sense that this thing that ARC says it's about, renewing the foundations of Western civilization,
and especially the Christian story. Is that something you're encountering more widely?
Yep. Yeah, I am, because I think what's happened is in our very postmodern culture where everything is all over the place, I'm drawing from this and that, I'm questioning everything, people are looking for a foundation. And so you can't really soar unless you take off from some foundation. Or to shift the metaphor, it's like Newman's metaphor is the river gets energy from the banks. If you knock the banks of a river, it just spreads out into a lazy lake. But he's got strong banks, then boom, the river can move. And that's the paradox, is the more you emphasize the foundational values, the more dynamic a society becomes. To me, the postmodern thing produces a lot of cultural boredom because, all right, is that true? I don't know. Is that true? Maybe for you, but not for me. And can we find common ground? Well, don't do that. Don't impose your view on me. You got your truth, I got my truth. To me, that's a formula for cultural despair and a kind of laziness of the spirit. What I talked about today was this, the soul is meant to soar outward and upward, but it does so according to a lure, from a transcendence cause. I think all of that is operative today in people's desire to find the riverbanks again, to find the foundation. And they've been kind of floating on this lazy lake of postmodern skepticism and indifferentism and relativism. I won't bother you. You're floating on the lake over there. I'll float over here on my terms. But what a dull society that is. What an energy-less society that becomes. To me, at its best, that's what a conference like this is about.
And Word on Fire, your own ministry, which has just had this fantastic rise to, being so influential in the YouTube world, in the podcast world and elsewhere. And so many, as far as I can see, secular people starting to reconsider Christianity because of your ministry. Is there something happening in the culture, I suppose, where people are looking for something more solid, a foundation? And I guess you're speaking into that?
Yes, they're looking for it. And I'll do the other side of it. The church has not been very good at providing it. So the church I came of age in, so right after Vatican II, I go to first grade in 1965, the year the council ends. So my whole formation, even in the seminary, was very post-conciliar. And it participated to some degree in that cultural drift I was just talking about. A certain lack of confidence, a lack of evangelical boldness, don't be imposing things, And then that tendency typical of liberalism to reduce the supernatural to the natural. So religion becomes, in my time, psychology was extremely important. A lot of priests became psychologists. Sermons became psychological in focus. And the other great option, of course, is politics. So reduce the supernatural to the political. Does the supernatural indeed have political and psychological implications? Of course, but you don't naturalize the supernatural, you should supernaturalize the natural. Now, that's the way I would name it. When I was coming of age, it was very much the liberal model. And I think that ran out of steam for a lot of people, and the church became rather inept, I think, at proposing its own message. So I think Word on Fire maybe is making its own small contribution to that, is the church finding its voice again. There was a hand-wringing quality to the Catholicism of my youth. Who are we to be telling you, very apologetic, in the negative sense of apologetic. And I think we're finding our footing again and finding our voice again.
It feels like that. It feels like there's a sort of confidence that's come back. Hopefully not a kind of hubris or anything like that, but something which says, actually, no, we've got a message and people are kind of ready to hear it again.
And, I'll get a little too academic here, but the source of a lot of the mischief is Friedrich Schleiermacher, the founder of modern...
You don't know.
And I'll explain, the founder of modern liberal Protestantism, who writes a famous book, 1799, called On Religion, Speeches to Its Cultured Despisers. And it's a great book in the history of theology, indeed, but it set the tone for much of liberalism, both Protestant and Catholic. What's our job? Well, we've got cultured despisers out there, people that don't like us, and they don't like our message. So I got to find a way to get them to like me. That's the wrong instinct, it seems to me. I don't think St. Paul was giving speeches to the cultured despisers. Paul was announcing Jesus Christ in a culturally engaged way, to be sure. So it's not an either or. But the Schleiermacher move was more the I come hat in hand to the secular culture and begging them to pay attention to me. No, Paul came into town with a message, anastasis, resurrection, Jesus rose from the dead. And so there was a kind of pandering quality to too much of Catholic life. And I think we're overcoming that. I think John Paul II, as I was coming of age then, represented an alternative. I think he showed how you can evangelize in a very bold, very confident, and non-violent, non-threatening way. And someone, talk about plugged into the culture, John Paul II. So he knew how to engage the culture, but not in the Schleiermacher mode of giving speeches, hoping they'll take it seriously, but a confident proclamation.
And that Schleiermacher mode arguably was about trying to sort of make Christianity and its supernatural claims a bit more palatable to a sort of rational Western culture. I feel almost like the reverse is now becoming true, that people need the weirdness, the strangeness of Christianity. That's actually part of its attraction.
Absolutely. And go right back, again, take Schleiermacher at the beginning of the 19th century, then about the middle of the 19th century of Kierkegaard, who says, my job as a theologian is to make Christianity hard to believe. And see, it was a typical Kierkegaard sort of move, but is to say, well, look, if it's easy to believe, it's not worth believing. Then I'm just echoing the secular culture. I'm saying what any psychologist or political activist or Oprah could say, right? But I want to make this thing strange, hard to believe. A carpenter rose from the dead, but that's my message, And that has always been worth proclaiming because it's strange. Now, it doesn't mean the resurrection is an irrational message. It's not. Read N.T. Wright's 800-page book on the resurrection, to see a rational account of it if you want. But it does mean you lead with what's distinctive and boldly so about Christianity.
You'll be able to hear more of my interview with Bishop Barron about the surprising rebirth happening in Catholic circles on a future episode of the show. By the way, Bishop Barron mentioned Bible scholar and former Anglican Bishop N.T. Wright, and in another future episode you'll also hear my conversation with both of them that took place just a couple of days after ARC in the very same venue of the Excel Centre as part of the Word on Fire UK conference. Well, as you've been hearing, ARC brought people in from many different countries to London, including many attendees from Northern Europe. Now, Nordic, Scandinavian countries have become famously secular during the course of the 20th and 21st century. But according to many people, a rebirth is underway in countries like Norway, Finland and Sweden. I caught up with Mikhael Laursen, General Secretary of the Free Church Network in Denmark.
You got in touch with me when you saw that we were both going to be here at ARC, because you've been listening to the Surprise and Rebirth podcast series, and you've said something is happening like this in Denmark, maybe even more so in Denmark. I mean, just give us a flavour of what you're seeing in terms of thought leaders, maybe some quite well-known personalities really taking Christianity seriously.
Yeah, we've seen cultural person. It started like 5-6 years ago with some cultural personalities suddenly starting about that they have met Jesus.
Wow.
And just that statement, I have met Jesus, is like totally provoking. Like, we are a Lutheran country, and in a Lutheran country, faith is private. It's something you keep to yourself. You don't babble about it, and by no means you don't just say Jesus. I mean, then you can't totally out of it. But suddenly we had cultural personalities who said, I met Jesus. And one of them, who's now then become my friend, who's well known by everybody in Denmark, and who has lived a completely wild life, had a Jesus encounter and was very loud about it. And it's not only because of him, it was several people who started to speak about it. And that combined with a political development where more and more people in the political world is realizing we need roots. We got a new king in Denmark recently, and his words, like every king needs to choose a slogan, so to speak, like a motto. And his motto is that we are united and connected for the kingdom of Denmark. And those words, united and connected and committed for the kingdom of Denmark, really raises the question, what unites us, what makes us committed, and for what?
Yes.
And that has raised, that has been adding into the conversation of what role does Christianity play in this? So to my surprise, I found that irrespective of whether you are liberal or you are conservative, whether you are left-wing or right-wing, that I encountered the same questions, the same search, the same openness for Christianity. And By God's grace, in what I'm doing, I'm allowed to work a lot with MPs, and there is a huge openness and search and leaning into Christianity, which we must take hold of and help. Because if Christianity becomes instrumentalized or something that helps us for the moment, it will just be a tide that will go away again. But if it becomes something that we actually can build in society, where we build structures in this moment of openness and of search, then those structures will stand there, even if the tide in 10 years' time might turn. Yeah. I'm often thinking about the story in Denmark. There was a missionary who came to Denmark when the Vikings were still worshiping their gods. And he won their trust, and they opened up and said, okay, we want to become Christians. And they were baptized, these kings. And then they said, make Denmark Christian. And what he did was that he went out and then he started building churches. And for the next 300 years, there was being built churches in Denmark. And for the next 300 years, people were still worshiping both God and Thor. And there was a mixture of this. And the point in that is, he was using the open door to build structures that would keep on even if the doors were being shut again. And I think that's our task as Christians. That is finding out how can we build structures that last, structures that lift Christianity, and structures that will stay there even when the world in 10 years' time might change. So we actually have seen that the water level, the Christian water level in society has raised and will continue to raise.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that 1,000 years ago, people who would never live to see them built huge cathedrals across Europe that today still stand as a testament to there was something happened, in this place, and are kind of, even in a very post-Christian secular culture, stand as a reminder to there have been people who really believed that there was a God to be worshipped, and we may yet see those places full again. Who knows?
Yes.
Bless you. So nice to meet you.
And thank you for what you're doing.
From a Christian in Denmark to an atheist from Germany, I bumped into Matthias, who runs the video channel Biased Skeptic. As a YouTuber in the mould of the cosmic skeptic, Alex O'Connor, Matthias told me that while he still considers himself an atheist, he's been on his own journey of becoming more open to God in recent years.
What do you make, kind of as a agnostic atheist, what do you make of the sort of the quite interesting Christian sort of perspectives that are often shared from the stage and so?
When I went to ARC first, it was last year in Bavaria, and it was a small conference, and I was expecting a lot of Christians, but it was, I think, 99% of Christians, or the people I talked to at least.
That's interesting.
And here I met a lot of more atheistic leaning people, but still there's a lot of Christians, obviously, and like you mentioned on stage, like almost every talk has included Judeo-Christian belief or the morality behind it and foundation for culture. And I mean, I do engage on a daily basis with those ideas and people like this, so I'm not shocked or appalled or anything, but 2 or 3 people told me, oh, they didn't expect it. It's a little bit weird.
Right.
Yeah, they were not expecting to hear so many Christian ideas.
Okay. I just wondered what sort of journey you've been on, whether it mirrors in any way that kind of trajectory, which I've met quite a few times now, and I've talked about and written about quite a bit in The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. I don't know whether you've changed in any way over time yourself.
I truly hope so, and I'm not just by my YouTube name, by Skeptic. I was very much influenced by Alex O'Connor. Yeah, your listeners will know him for sure. It's Cosmic Skeptic. And I think you can really see where New Atheism started when you see his old videos, and you see him talking about religion, especially Christianity now. And yeah, I mean, I grew up on Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and all the 4 horsemen of New Atheism. And in the beginning, like I said before, I was trying to find the right answer to everything. So this is debunked now, we can move on. And yeah, the more I delved into it, and yeah, I was on the same trajectory and for sure influenced by people like Alex. And yeah, so it's the same for me. I thought it's just illogical and it's wishful thinking, but I'm reading the Bible. I read it already once. So and people like
what
Jordan.
What did you make of it? Just be fascinated to know what you think.
I mean, yeah, people told me if you don't understand, you have to go to people who do understand, because there's different ways to read the Bible. And I'm doing my best.
Good on you.
Yes, and I think it's just fair, especially when you want to criticize something. You have to engage with the original text. You have to engage with the contemporary belief about it, the interpretation, and with the best arguments, essentially. I think there's so much wisdom in there, for sure. There's much to find there, and I totally see the utility in Christianity. And I mean, yeah, I look for meaning daily. I think I found it in my life, but I have to kind of come up with some assumptions over reality and being, so that I can make sense of it. And Christianity, for sure, and the Bible offers a lot of guidance, or even, a fundamental basis.
Not every atheist present has been feeling the spirit move, however. I interviewed former BBC presenter Andrew Gold, who, after falling out with the Beeb's diversity initiatives, began his very own successful YouTube channel, Heretics, critiquing so-called woke culture. As a secular Jewish atheist, I began by asking him about the overlap between atheist and religious believers at ARC.
Look, there's been an alliance, an unholy alliance. I'm not the first to say this. We've been talking about it, all of us, I imagine you have been, for years, between a kind of anti-woke atheist crowd and an anti-woke religious crowd. The kinds of people who would have hated one another in the 90s. And we appear to have put aside our differences.
The phrase that I've heard used is we are now co-belligerents.
Co-belligerents.
This common enemy, and so we've put aside our religious differences to say we need to save the West, and
I think that's it. And so these things that seemed so important to us 20 years ago, like God is not real, yes he is, and of course those are still really fundamental questions, of course they are.
Has any of this kind of moved you in any way at the religious level, being around religious people more, having a bit more common cause? Has it kind of in any way caused you to ask the God question, or is that still a kind of very secondary?
Like zilch. And I hate saying it because it's such a boring answer. So I would love to say, hey, I was moved in some way. That's a much more interesting answer. And I look much less closed-minded, if I were able to say that. I have nothing. Right. Nothing. It's like me saying, do you believe you can walk through that wall right now? It's nothing.
Has anything shifted, though, perhaps as you've seen your own Jewish culture being threatened? Sort of leaned in a bit more to even the religious element of that. I don't know.
Yeah, not the religious element.
Not the religious.
Yeah, I got no spirituality in me, and I wish I did. I
feel like I'm trying to get blood out of a stone.
I know. I'm so sorry.
There's some little element of spirituality.
I want to believe. That's as far as I can go. I definitely.
I'll take that.
Yeah. Oh, do I want to believe? I find it difficult, and but I know the comments because I've seen the comments when I've said things like this, and they're all just like, oh, can't you just push over? Can't you just? Oh, what? How sad and all of that, and people sometimes say, and I know you'll be familiar with this argument, and it's sort of a baseless argument, which is like, well, is it Pascal's wager? Like you should believe because but you can't make yourself believe, and I fundamentally don't. However, I have loads of friends who are Christians now. I didn't have that before, and they're great people, and they have wonderful morals by which to live. And it might be the case, as is being said a lot, that we actually needed it. And that's where there's probably a change. Maybe we need that. And that comes from a patronizing place. And I don't mean to be, but it comes, and I don't mean patronizing to Christians, right, but it's patronizing to the people at large. But I do feel like you can sort of trust individuals, but large groups you can't. And I don't know how that works. And I'm sure, but I know everybody has that feeling of like an individual, he's not going to go and do a stupid thing. But 70 million people, they're going to do stupid things. So it's also, I don't mean to say, yes, for you guys, you need this kind of moral guidance. I don't.
Yeah. But it does push into this sort of slightly awkward question that I keep bumping up against here of, well, are a lot of people here basically saying we need religion as a useful fiction, for the opiate of the masses or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a bit better than that. It's something really positive, but don't ask us to actually believe it. I mean, I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but
it sort of is though, and but I am aware of the complexity there. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and why it seems patronizing.
Right, exactly.
You guys need these stories that I don't believe in.
As I mentioned to Andrew Gold, many people I've been engaging with in the surprising rebirth movement are in the lapsed atheist category, former skeptics who are now reading the Bible and finding value in faith, but aren't yet believers. And that includes people like conservative thinker and social media influencer James Lindsay.
Did you have a new atheist phase where you were dismissive and antagonistic?
I would say from 2010 to 2015 or 16, pretty strongly, which I have publicly repented of that behavior.
I love the language as well.
I don't think that was a very becoming way to engage with the issues. And
what changed your mind?
Engaging with Christians primarily and finding, first that the arguments that they present are much more interesting when taken seriously rather than being dismissed. Coming to understand, in fact, watching the so-called new atheist movement swing wildly woke, right, and to fragment as a result and to ultimately fall, led me to appreciate that that led me, of course, to study critical theory and to study Marxist thought. And it led me to realize that a lot of what the new atheist movement was doing was what should properly be called critical religion theory.
Right.
It's just it's not a genuine way of engaging in the discussions or the debates. And I found it all to be much more fruitful once I started to actually engage with the discussions properly.
But you see the value of Christian faith, Christian values.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And I find the Bible to be a rather profound document at this point, whereas, in my new atheist days, I certainly
was going to say that's almost strange if you went back and told yourself 10 years ago.
Yeah,
you'd be saying this.
And it's deeper than just mere utility, although I can see why perhaps maybe Os Guinness or somebody would, or maybe even you guys would call it a utility view. So my view, I don't take the metaphysical claims of the Bible literally true, obviously, or else I would have said I was a Christian when you asked. Instead, what I see as it being a very profound document of very deep and profound truths about what it means to be human and organized in human societies that wish to be successful and flourishing. And so there's a type. I don't want this to sound postmodern and silly, right? By saying there's a kind of truth, but there is a even without adopting the full metaphysical claims, there is a truth quality to what I see as written in the Bible that can be understood in merely an anthropological sense, right? Yeah. Without having to take the metaphysical side as well. Now, whether that makes me utility, I don't merely say, oh, it's useful, therefore we should adopt it.
Yeah.
I think it's useful because it is accurately depicting and reflecting some very deep truths about humanity.
James Lindsay. And by the way, that was just an extract of a longer conversation between James and Christian writer and thinker Bethel McGrew. We'll be releasing it in full on our YouTube channel, but you can watch early, right now in fact, if you become a supporter. Another online influencer with a similar story to James Lindsay, a conservative cultural critic not afraid of causing some controversy, is Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad. He too was once a rabble-rouser on the side of new atheism. But when I engaged him in an interview, I was surprised to find that now, even as a non-Christian who was never raised in any faith, he regularly takes himself and his children along to church.
I mean, if I were given control of the education system now, it would look very different and probably very Christian, even though I'm not on myself, which I realize is ironic. But I view myself as living in a paradigm where I've had something taken away from me. Before I was able to walk, this had been taken away from me, and I don't want that taken away from my children. So, for example, my son, a couple of years ago, he's 10 now, but when he was, I don't know, 6 or 7, he's in a multicultural school, as children are, and he has friends who are Indian and they're Hindus, and he's like, "Oh, Dad, what am I? Am I a Christian?" I'm like, "Yes, you're a Christian, son." And I arbitrated a discussion between him and my eldest daughter, which said, "No, we're not Christian." I was like, "Yes, we are, Steve." Like, just, this is where we are in the paradigm where we're Christian Englishmen, Jewish women. This is what we are, and you be aware of it, basically. And so he's very readily said, "Oh, I like being Christian. I like Jesus. I like," that's brilliant, son. That's absolutely brilliant. I'm glad you get to have something I didn't have.
Okay.
And it really hit me when we got our children baptized. So my wife wanted all of our kids to be baptized in her local church. which I kind of hate. It's not the baptism, it's the church itself. It's just this empty red brick structure, and it just kind of reeks of modernity, And so I'm like, look, if I'm going to go to religion, I want religion, right?
I want an old building.
Yeah, it doesn't have to just be an old building, but I want, like, they have like modern pop songs playing in there, and I'm like, no, I want hymns. I want, let's do this properly if we're going to sit through it, right? And so, yeah. But anyway, when we were getting baptized, they actually did have hymns, and I was sat there. I've never heard this before. I don't know the song. I don't know the tune. I don't know the lyrics. So I'm like watching everyone around me, like my mum, my dad, my aunties, my uncles, who themselves were forced to go to church when they were young, and they hated it. And they themselves were all atheists. But my dad is there singing with his chest out, like, whoa, boy, and my mum's singing as well. She's not enjoying it as much as my dad. But I can tell from my dad that what this is nostalgia. Yeah. He's 10 years old on Sunday morning in the church singing when everything was normal and secure. And I don't have that. And I realized that was something that was missing.
Yeah.
And so when my children say I'm interested in religion, that's great.
Carl Benjamin. Again, the full video conversation that I had with him alongside Bethel McGrew and my full conversation with Andrew Gold will all be available early to supporters of the podcast. The cast of characters we've heard from in the latter part of today's show are a reminder that big changes are afoot. Some of them have moved very explicitly from the New Atheist camp to the Cultural Christian camp. I urged them to keep pulling on that thread because they might just meet the real Jesus. But as Glenn Scrivener and Father Andrew Damick reflected earlier, I find that there's a lot of interesting and fruitful conversations to be had with those who find themselves in this strange new world, longing for more, but they haven't yet stepped into Christian faith. And that is the fascinating and often frustrating tension that's represented at the ARC conference as it convenes co-belligerent Christian and secular thinkers in the cause of reinvigorating Western civilization. So should we all get aboard the ARC? Couched in the psychological language he's known for and returning to his opening themes of responsibility and sacrifice, Jordan Peterson encouraged the gathered delegates to do just that, get on board, in a final rousing closing address, complete with orchestral backing.
If you sacrifice what's lesser and you bring your best to the table, and you do that in a manner that's hospitable and inviting, that everyone else could and would do the same, and then you dine forever with your confreres at the heavenly banquet, and you set the world right. Welcome aboard the Ark. Pick up an oar and row.
The ARC conference remains for me a really mixed bag, as I've expressed in the opening episodes of this season. In the worst case, I fear that the surprising rebirth could be squeezed out or disastrously co-opted for political purposes by movements like ARC. But the desire for renewal I've witnessed, especially among delegates on the ground, goes beyond purely political motivations. At its best, I believe ARC could provide a positive vision for cultural flourishing based on Christian values, as long as it is Christ at the centre, rather than some supposed version of Christendom. But any vision of a flourishing future has to be one that somehow includes rather than excludes those who find that their political allegiances don't match the average speaker at ARC. Nevertheless, I'm hopeful, and I've appreciated Peterson's role in encouraging a new openness to the value of faith, even if I found his closing speech on the more melodramatic side. In fact, the closing act that really helped to end the conference on a note of optimism and hope, not in our own ability to bring transformation externally, but in the God who came in person to transform us from the inside out, was from spoken word artist Joshua Luke Smith. So it's his full rendition from the stage of his poem Sunflowers in Babylon that we'll end today's show with.
When Uncle Terry died, we placed sunflowers on his casket. No children survived him, so he tithed his savings to the conservation of butterflies. The church was cold, those old stones holding the stories of 30 or so generations, matrimony and lament, baptism and dedications. He was the last of his siblings, so now buried was a lineage like those sunflowers that he cherished. We printed a picture of him standing beneath one and decided that was how he'd be remembered. All those memories now sunk beneath the soil. But when spring arrives and thaws the frost-bound ground, they will not rise. Their time has come and gone. We are but butterflies, fluttering for a day and believing it is forever. What can I say of a life that was so weathered? And by that, I mean, my uncle lived seasonally. How else do you plant a garden unless you submit to both the summer and the wintering? His calloused hands told the story of handling living things. The bleak cold mornings and that joy of welcome spring, the pain of mourning what could have been, and the joy in receiving the gifts the giver came to bring. Are we not standing in the gardens planted by our forefathers? Are we not reaping a harvest we didn't sow? Are we not leaning on the limbs of an oak and standing within the shade of a forest that someone else chose to grow? Martin Luther was asked, if you knew tomorrow the world would end and today would be your last, how would you spend it? And he said, I would plant an apple tree. The Greeks believed a society only thrives when people plant trees they know they'll never live to see. So how fickle we have been, tossed by every changing wind, giving in before we have become a witness. Yes, there is the life we live, but there is the unlived life within us, and between the two stands the resistance. Nietzsche put it like this: it is long obedience in the same direction that brings heaven to our streets. So summon the critic, bring me the cynic, I'll tell him this: blessed are the meek. Blessed is the one who still believes, childlike, impoverished, hardly able to even speak, but who has not forgotten Solomon's wisdom. For it is not the lack of wealth, reputation, or esteem, but the absence of vision that brings people to their knees. So distracted by our greed and our lust to succeed, we have gathered into barns instead of casting out our seed. And yet it is the back scarred by wooden beams and the sacrifice of fools that remind us of the actions that actually move us closer to the renewal. Did you hear of Fukushima, when the sea brewed and the earth hurled herself into the ground? A nuclear site erupted. An invisible storm rained down, contaminating the land and poisoning the food, and they evacuated thousands, but for those that couldn't move, they stayed housed in, surrounded by elusive clouds that lingered like ghosts, becoming suspicious of the air that they once innocently consumed. And yet, amongst the chaos, there was a monk dressed in crimson hues who walked through those fields planting sunflower seeds within the ruins. And over time they grew and they removed the poison, sunflowers, offering themselves as objects of both beauty and atonement. They drew the cancer from the ground into themselves until it was broken down, announcing, where sunflowers lift their golden crowns, we find evidence of this hope. Even in the soil of decay, something beautiful can grow. I hear the voice of an ancient prophet speaking to a depleted people, housed in the walls of exile and defeat. They are longing for a home they've only heard of, a city they're unsure of, a country where they hope to be, and it is to them this wild man comes with fire on his tongue. He descends with a word from the God that they have almost forgotten, and he says, do you want a revolution? Do you want a revelation? Do you want to renew your vision and reshape a broken nation? Do you want to overthrow the systems that have polluted the minds of your children and your spirits? Do you want to live in abundance and remember where you come from? Do you want to do the will of God, or at least undo the will of demons? Do you want to see people prosper in every sphere and across every tier of meaning? Do you want to live a life worth remembering? Do you want to leave a legacy? Do you want to offer something to future generations only now brewing in the wombs of their mothers and the hearts of their fathers? Do you want to be worthy ancestors? Do you want to answer the call and stand before kings, not as princes or princesses, but as jesters, making a mockery of power built on bricks towards heaven? Do you believe beauty can save the world? That the stories told within those trenches were more powerful in the hands of the soldiers than their weapons? And do you want to starve out the madness and restore man's appetite for sanity? Do you want to come back to clarity and conviction? Do you want to build a society on the foundations of wisdom instead of self-serving ambition? Well then, plant a garden. Plant a garden in Babylon. Bury your seeds in the soil that you've battled against for so long, because this is the only world to which you will ever belong. So turn your exile into Eden and turn your sorrow into a song. Turn your rejection into the birth pains of restoration, and mine from your frustration the potential of growth. Pull from your suffering a morsel of hope, and forgive your captors. Forgive the ones that made you bleed, let them go. For it is time for us to build. No, it is time for us to sow. No, it is time for us to become the seed, to live in proximity, to lay our lives down so that others one day can simply breathe. Empty the barns in which you've stored. Build a bigger table. Invite your enemies over for dinner and open up your doors. Love your neighbors like you love yourself. And love yourself like you love your neighbors. And for the love of God, remember the poor. Remember the poor. Remember the poor. Sweep your streets like you're paving gold, because in reality you are. How you do anything is how you do everything. Make your stand against injustice loud. No, make it deafening. Push the needle towards integrity. Pour kintsugi gold into the hostage memory. Turn those ashes into confetti. Burn down the idols and craft wedding rings, covenantal icons from the bed sheets of adultery, and build tree houses for your children in the Garden of Gethsemane. I don't know if we have long left, and I don't know if they'll remember me or you, but we do have work to do, and this may be our legacy. Sunflower shoots in Babylonian cemeteries. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. For they have built empires out of the dust from which they came, and we have watched them fall time and again, but we will not do the same. We have learned from their mistakes. In their place, we will build not high-rise apartments or regal estates, but gardens. Because who is really in prison when steel bars become a trellis? When roses wrap themselves around the fences of a cell, that's when the fires of hell are drowned in the mountain springs that come down from heaven. When my Uncle Terry died, we placed sunflowers on his casket, and we let the tears dry on our skin. We vowed, despite the powers and present darkness, we would not cower, nor would we give in.
You've been listening to the surprising rebirth of belief in God with me, Justin Brierley, continuing to tell the story of why many secular 21st century people are considering Christianity again. As ever, please do leave a rating and a review of the podcast and share it with others. It helps to get the word out. And this podcast is also a book. You can read chapter 1 for free when you subscribe to my newsletter. And if you'd like to help me reach many more people with Thinking Faith, please consider becoming a monthly supporter of my work. Silver supporters get early access to new episodes as well as bonus content. And as I mentioned earlier, we're releasing a number of these interviews that you heard snippets from in full on our YouTube channel in coming weeks, including James Lindsay, Andrew Gold, Carl Benjamin, and Bishop Barron. But you'll be the first to see them if you become a supporter. In addition, Gold supporters also get signed copies of my books and a monthly catch-up call with me. The links are with the show notes. Coming up next time.
Young men are asking the big meta questions, the existential question. That interest is taking them right back to religion. religion broadly and in the West, Christianity in particular. And so they're open.
And the most rapid or most exciting change within those young people is among the young men. It has surprised us. I'm not gonna lie. It is remarkable.
A male identity crisis has been brewing in the West for some time. Hit shows like Adolescence have reminded us of the negative influence on young men of characters like Andrew Tate in The Manosphere. But young men are also turning to Christian role models. Find out about the surprising rebirth among young men in the first of 2 episodes on the return of young men to church. But don't forget, you can listen to that episode right now when you become a silver or gold supporter. And again, right now, you'll also get access to my full conversation with James Lindsay and early access to other conversations I recorded at ARC. Again, the links to support are with the show notes, where you can also find links to all of today's guests and the material. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God is a production of Think Faith in partnership with Genexus and the Jerusalem Trust. Editing assistance by Isaac Simmons. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
This episode is brought to you by Principles. Are there limits to the U.S. government's debt growth? What will happen if the debts are not curtailed? What should policymakers or investors do? Those are urgent questions that legendary investor and New York Times bestselling author Ray Dalio addresses in his new book, How Countries Go Broke: The Big Cycle. The book comes out in June and is available for pre-order today, wherever books are sold.
Experience a progressive lens engineered with AI from Essilor, powered by individual measurements of your visual behavior. A lens personalized to you by an Essilor expert. Discover Verilux XR Track and enjoy instantly sharp vision in motion and seamless transitions from near to far. Find your local Essilor expert today at Essilor.com.
The Christian faith is not going away in postmodern Western culture, but actually has the potential to grow exponentially again in our time. That was how one reviewer was left feeling after reading the book that this podcast is based on. Why not grab yourself a copy of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God and find out why new atheism grew old and secular thinkers are considering Christianity again? You can even purchase a signed copy exclusively from my website. Just go to the book link with the podcast info.